So welcome to another edition of the Alshech Academy, and today we are starting our fundraising campaign. This is in the next 48 hours, we are inviting the whole world to come and join us and to donate to supporting our Alshech Academy and to help us to sustain this academy going forward. And we have a very beautiful offer. And that is this book of Yosef Stepansky, he wrote this book on the field of holy apples. It's about the Ari Ashkenazi synagogue here in Tzfat. It's a beautiful book with great descriptions and pictures and the
biography of the Ari.
And the biography of the Ari. We are offering this book digitally to anyone who subscribes onto our website to receive our weekly newsletter. We will be sending you an electronic version of this book, which Yossi has written. It's worth 120 shekels in the shops.
For a hard copy at the shul.
For a hard copy at the shul.
So you'll have to come to the shul itself to get a hard copy or a digital copy.
Or a digital copy.
At home.
So you'll get a personal digital copy at home. All you need to do is to go into our website, which is alshechacademy.org, and register there to receive our newsletter. And we will send you an electronic version of this book. So I'm really excited about this, and I'm looking forward to getting my copy of that. This is really very, very exciting indeed. So we have Yosef Stepansky here, and before we start any of the lessons, we welcome any questions you might have, either on the chat or if you text me. Question, we'd be happy to receive it. In the meantime, could you just tell us a little bit about this prophecy that the Mashiach will come riding on a donkey through Tzfat? I mean, can you just share us a little bit of that?
In 2 minutes or an hour?
In 3 minutes. In 3 minutes.
That's why we're here, Shlomo.
Exactly.
Okay. First, I have to say that the tradition that the Mashiach will appear in the Galil is one of the main reasons, maybe the main reason, why Jews came to Tzfat 500 years ago, 400 years ago. Okay? So where does this belief begin? So first of all, for all I know, I think I have a lecture on this in YouTube on this also, but in Hebrew. The basis for this, in my belief, is the Talmud, the Gemara, Masechet Rosh Hashanah, the tractate Rosh Hashanah. I think Lamed Gimel. I think the 33rd. I don't know Shas by heart, but that I know, what I remember. And there, they're talking about Tveria. Okay, the stages, the different stations of the Sanhedrin. Just now, there's a new 1-hour movie coming out of the Sanhedrin. I sent it to you, Shlomo.
Yeah.
A whole new video in Hebrew, though, on the Sanhedrin. And Tveria was the last station for the Sanhedrin in the time of the Talmud, or after the Talmud, in the time of the Gaonim, until it moved there in the 10th century to Ramle and to Yerushalayim and then to Lebanon in Tyre. And I believe it finished up here in Tzfat when the last Gaon, I think we talked about that, the last Gaon in the 13th century was seen here in Tzfat. So in the Gemara, it's talking about the stations of the Sanhedrin from Yerushalayim to Yavne, from Yavne to Usha, from Usha to Shfar'am, from Shfar'am to Beit Sha'alim, from Beit Sha'alim to Tzipori, And at about 220 CE, okay, and after the time of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, who finished up the Mishnah, it moved to Tveria. And in Tveria, we have the great rabbis, the great Talmudists, Rabbi Yochanan v'Resh Lakish. They were in Tveria. And the Talmud Yerushalmi, the Jerusalem Talmud, was compiled there. Okay, the name Jerusalem was given to the Talmud to give respect to Jerusalem. But it happened, it was in Tveria. And Rabbi Yochanan describes the stations of the Sanhedrin, and he says, now we're in Tveria. The Sanhedrin came to Tveria, and it's a low place. Low because geographically it's low. You know, Shlomo, it's a kilometer below us. We have to go down elevation 1,000 meters down to get to Tveria, to the Kinneret. So we go down. It's a low place, but Rabbi Yochanan said, from here, from this low place, we come up. And then he said, from Tveria, umisham atidin ligael. From Tveria, in the future, the Geula, the redemption, will re-begin in Tveria. If you ask me, that's the basis for all the further, later on, traditions of the Mashiach appearing in the Galil. So actually, the tradition begins in Tveria.
And not
And
Tzfat.
then, we'll get to Tzfat. But the tradition, this is the basis from the Gemara. Okay, and afterward, they believed that the Mashiach would appear first near Tveria in the valley of Arbel. The Arbel Valley, beautiful valley. Okay, and that's mentioned in the sources of the 6th, 7th century, the Piyutim. Okay, in the poems, in the songs, and even in the Kinot. Okay, and so we have the Tveria Valley of Arbel, Begat Arbel tradition. That the Mashiach, which Mashiach though? Mashiach ben Yosef or Mashiach ben David? And then we have other compilations. Of course, we have the Zohar. In the Zohar, it's mentioned 3 times that the Mashiach will appear in the land of Galilee. It doesn't say Tzfat. Okay, but Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is our neighbor here in Meron. And Jews started believing this, the Galil is here in Tzfat. This is because the Jews started coming to Tzfat, Galil Elyon. Rav Sadia Gaon, and there's also another midrash that mentions, Rav Sadia Gaon mentions the mountains of Galilee, Harei Galil. One of the midrashim mentions Galil Elyon, I think, Upper Galilee. But only really in the, I would say, 15th, 16th century, even before the 6th, even before the time of Yosef Kar, before the great spiritual explosion that I talk about in the 16th century, people started coming to Tzfat. Tzfat was the most important Jewish community. It was the biggest city in all of Israel then, bigger than Yerushalayim in the 14th, 15th, 16th centuries, until Yerushalayim, until Suleiman built the wall around Yerushalayim. Tzfat was even bigger. The Jews started coming to Tzfat. Next to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the author of the Zohar, according to the Jewish tradition, and they believed that the Mashiach will appear here. So the traditions moved from place to place in Galilee, and Tzfat became the most important Jewish center. Right? We're talking about that 500 years, 600 years ago. And there's a date. We have different years, like 1540, we talked about that. And people started coming to Tzfat believing that the Mashiach will appear here. Besides that, there's also, this is for a whole section in itself. We're going to get to this sometime. Let me just finish up in saying, Meron also has to do with this, because in Sanhedrin, in the tractate of Sanhedrin, in the Talmud, we also have a story of the Mashiach waiting in a city, or in the gates of a city right near the cave of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. So which city is that? Meron. Okay? And even though in the uncensored Talmud of Sanhedrin it says Rome, but here in Tzfat they learn from the censored Gemara of Shas, and there it just says the gates of the city, and we're talking about Eliyahu Navi telling Rabbi Shua ben Levi, go to the gate of the city and meet the Mashiach there. And Rabbi Shua Bar Yochai is in Meron. And so this also led to the belief, until today, the elders of Tzfat believe that the Mashiach is waiting in Meron underneath the lintel of the ancient synagogue. Maybe we'll set that for a lecture in itself. And that's the reason why today we're here. Meron is a neighborhood of ours. Okay, we can walk there. 4 hours from here, walking through Nachal Amud, you get to Meron. And there the lintel of the synagogue is still standing. And every time I go there, okay, I imagine the Mashiach is there, waiting to be called to come to us to Tzfat. So here you see how I think this tradition developed.
Beautiful. Okay. So please carry on with...
okay, so we're going back to our theme.
Yeah.
We're talking history.
Yeah.
We're talking about the background of the great rabbis who lived here. And Shlomo, we're going to talk one day about the wondrous women of Tzfat.
Oh, very good.
Okay, there are today wondrous women today. Well, I say that for my wife. Today also there are wondrous women of Tzfat, but we'll get to that also. But now we're talking about the great rabbis, well known. We talked about Rabbi Yosef Karo. He was here 40 years, our neighbor here right behind the wall here.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about the Alshech also. He deserves a full lecture.
Amen.
Rabbi Moshe Alshech and this unique place. But before that, I thought maybe I'll show now and then like something having to do with the history of Tzfat that I think I haven't shown yet. I mentioned that Tzfat, 1,500 years ago, had also a Jewish community here, one of the 24 communities of the Kohanim, of the priests. And I like to show this picture of an ancient inscription in Hebrew, dated to about 1,500 years ago. It says Tzfat. Okay? Mm-hmm. This is an inscription mentioning the 24 priestly families that were in the Galilee about 1,500 years ago. The time of the Talmud, maybe a little after. There are big arguments exactly on the historical background for this list. But Tzfat is one of them. Okay, we had the priestly family of Yakim Fashchur. 2 names, we don't know if they're 2 families or one big family with 2 names, we don't know. Yakim Fashchur. They were here in Tzfat about 1,500, 1,600 years ago. But this inscription mentioning Tzfat was not found in Tzfat. It's still in Yemen, in Teiman. Okay? East of Tzana, in Beit el-Khadir. It was discovered about 70, 80 years ago. Okay? It's still there. It's the longest inscription we have in archaeology, in epigraphy. It's incised on stone. It's today part of a mosque. I wasn't there. I'm dreaming of going to see it, but I think there's no chance of going in the next, I don't know how many years. Not with an Israeli passport and not with an American passport, because it's under the government by the Houthim, those guys in northern Yemen. So Tzfat, the earliest or the most ancient inscription mentioning Tzfat in archaeology is this one in Yemen. Okay? And I'm dreaming for years of bringing it here to Tzfat. So in the meantime, what could I do, Shlomo? I printed this out from the book that published it, and I gave it to the Yemenite synagogue in Tzfat to put on the wall. And it's there. You know, Yemenite synagogue right behind my house. And Rabbi Yoav Nadav put it on the wall. It says Tzfat in the Yemenite synagogue of Tzfat. So that's something in history to remind us that Tzfat has a long history. 4,000 years old, and the Jewish presence here is 2,100 years old, consecutive. We talked about that. Okay, so now let's get back to Rabbi Yosef Karo, and somebody who was here with him for 2 years, and that's the Ari, Rabbi Yitzhak Luria. People asked me, I'm going to show you, there are many, many books on these great rabbis on the 16th century of Tzfat. I think mainly in Hebrew. Maybe I'll show you the two books that I like to use in English. One, the cover already is torn, that's many years. Sapphic Spirituality. Okay? Okay, it was edited by Lawrence Fine, Professor Lawrence Fine. There's a preface by Rabbi Louis Jacobs from England, right? The chief rabbi of England, he was, right, of Britain. And so this came out maybe 30 years ago, but it has also short biographies of the rabbis. And I use this a lot. There's also a book put out also about 30 years ago, Safed the Mystical City, by David Rossoff. Okay, I think he wrote it for youngsters. But first of all, we're all youngsters, right?
He wrote the book on Jerusalem as well.
Yes. And I don't know him personally. He wrote it 30 years ago. I hope he's still around. I'd like to meet him one day. It's a very fine book. It's good for everybody. It gives a nice history of Tzfat, the Jewish history. And these are the two books that I like to delve into. There are also academic books, of course, like I think I already mentioned. There's a book by Professor Vorbalowski in English on Rabbi Yosef Karo. The other ones I showed you last time are in Hebrew. So what I want to do is, maybe I'll start out with just a few reminders, not reminders. You see, we don't have a biography of the Ari, Rabbi Yitzhak Luria, like we have on Rabbi Yosef Karo, because no one wrote a biography on him when he was alive. And no one wrote anything about him hardly when he was alive, only after his death. The Ari was here only for 2 years, 1570 to 1572. And only afterward did people realize who he was, except for maybe the 30, 40 students he had around him who were listening to him, and they didn't really understand what he said. Not everybody understood what he had to say. Rabbi Chaim Vital, for years and years, was frustrated. Was he remembering correctly what he heard? Did he understand correctly? And when Rabbi Chaim Vital, for about a year, he was like with him all the time, listening to him, he himself writes that he used to forget the things that he heard from the Ari and didn't understand. So the Ari took him to Tveria, and they went on a boat, and they went to the well of Miriam that the Ari identified, and he gave him water from between the pillars of the well of Miriam. He gave Rabbi Chaim Vital a cup to drink, and he said, now you're going to understand what I'm talking about, because now you're drinking the waters of the well of Miriam. Okay, I think I identified the site where the Ari identified the well of Miriam, but it's on the shore of Tveria. It's not in the middle of the lake.
It's on the shore?
It's on the shore. Sure. It's on the shore. And that's Rabbi Chaim Vital's description, not mine. So it's not a well, but since he describes pillars, I found the pillars. They're still there, and they were excavated last year by Haifa University. So we can talk about that by itself, but I just wanted to show how when he talked, the Ari talked. It wasn't easy to understand him. He was very charismatic. He knew all the languages. He knew the Ari was born in Israel. He was born in Yerushalayim. So of course he knew Hebrew. He knew Arabic. He knew Palestinian Arabic. He knew Egyptian Arabic. And he knew Yiddish. He knew Yiddish because his father was from Germany. His father was an Ashkenazi. That's why he's called the Ari Ashkenazi. Or Ashkenazi Rabbi Yitzchak. Or Eloki Rabbi Yitzchak, the God given. Or the Ari Adonenu Rabbi Yitzchak also. So his father was European, so he knew Yiddish. But his mother was Sfaradia, so he knew Ladino. He knew all the languages. Is this a picture of the Ari? I may have shown this once. I don't remember. I'll show it again. Is this a portrait of the Ari? It just could be. Okay, I reprinted it in my book. It was discovered in an old book by Yecheskel Meili here in Tzfat, about 40 years ago. He printed it in one of the pamphlets he wrote on Tzfat, on the synagogues of Tzfat. He doesn't write exactly where he found this, in what book, and so no one knows today where he found this picture. And if anybody will find this picture in that old book, that'll be very sensational. Okay, so if you find an old book here in Tzfat and you see a picture like this, tell me immediately. Okay, in the meantime, we put a picture of it in the Ari Ashkenazi synagogue. And in my book, I wrote, it could be a picture of him. It seems, by the way, he's a young man here, right? He doesn't have gray hair. He passed away before he was 40. So, also in my book, I reprinted a picture of his handwriting, okay, where he wrote, this is published already, this is found in the Geniza in Cairo. And we have his signature here, even of the Ari. This is from Egypt. So we have here and there a few documents with his handwriting, okay, but he didn't have a chance to write at all. He talked, he told people, he looked at people, and he was here for 2 years, but it took time. I think 1 year with concentrated studying and learning he had with his certain group of students. He went from shul to shul. Okay, he came here to the Alshech and listened to the sermons of the Alshech. Okay, and the Ari Yitzhak Luria, born in 1534 in Yerushalayim, so he's a Yerushalmi, he's a Tzaba. He was born in Israel. But when he was about 8 years old or so, his father passed away. And so his mother took him to Egypt to her brother, the Sfaradi. And that's where the Ari grew up. And we don't have exactly the facts of what happened as he was growing up. In fact, most of the material we have is in literature. They call this hagiographic literature, legendary literature. We have stories on the Ari written about him after his death. And in these stories, we hear about him going to Egypt. That's fact. I think many of the stories here are based on historical fact. He went to Egypt and grew up there in Egypt. He learned in the yeshiva there. The great Rabbi David ben Zimra was in Egypt then. He studied by him. He had a colleague, friend, chavruta, or maybe teacher, called Harav Betzalel Ashkenazi, who wrote the compilation Shita Mekuvetzet, which people who learned in yeshiva, who learn today in yeshiva, study that when they're learning Talmud. The Shita Mekuvetzet, Harav Betzalel Ashkenazi. So the Ari wasn't the only Jew in Egypt then. Egypt was then a very important center for Jews. It was for many, many years, even until the middle of the 20th century. Rav Avad Yosef was in Egypt. He was a rabbi there in Egypt. So he grew up in Egypt. And in the end, he married his first cousin, the daughter of his uncle. We don't know her name, like usual. I would love to know her name. If somebody finds her tombstone next to her husband in the cemetery here with a name on it, great sensation. We don't know her name. So he married his first cousin, and she was a Sfaradia, okay? She was from Spanish descent. And that means that their children are 3/4 Spanish descent, Sfaradim. He himself is half Ashkenazi. That's part of his greatness. He was a little of everybody. He was partly Sfaradi, partly Ashkenazi. We'll talk more about that. I'm friends with a descendant of the Ari, who there's a whole genealogy of the family of the Ari, but there are things that aren't for certain. Like I told you, we don't know the name of the wife, but we do know that it seems that he had 3 daughters and 1 son. We have the names of of 2 of the 3 daughters, I think. Okay, and but I think I'm going too much into that. We'll go back. We'll get into his biography, his family, and his descendants. Because today we have a big Luria family. Luria is his family name from his father. Today we have a big family, Luria, all over the world. There are thousands. We have here in Tzfat. Like we have Karo here in Tzfat, we have Luria also in Tzfat. And members of both families are in my shul. I think we're the only shul in the world that has members of Luria and Karo together.
Wow.
Okay. Boaz, you know them, even you come to our shul. And we have them there. But what I want to do is, because I want to go back to Rabbi Yosef Karo. And Rabbi Yosef Karo, in 1570, when the Ari came, Rabbi Yosef Karo was already 82 years old. The Ari was about 36, 37 years old. Okay, so the Ari could be Rabbi Yosef Karo's grandson. And Rabbi Yosef Karo is the great Rosh Yeshiva. He's at the height of his career. He lives right next door. He's the head of the yeshiva here, Beit Yosef. And when the Ari comes, he comes quietly. He starts learning at the yeshiva of the Ramak, Rabbi Moshe Cordovero. The Rabbi Moshe Cordovero passes away about a half a year after the Ari comes, 1570. And in the legendary stories we read about, the Ramak pointed and knew who this person was already, the Ari. And according to one of the stories, when the Ramak passed away, the Ari was one of the people going with the Aron, right, with the coffin. He went down, and the Ramak beforehand told all his students, there's one person who will know exactly where to bury me. And one person will see the Amud Anan, will see the cloud of Hashem going before the Aron, and he'll know exactly where to bury me. And the Ari crept up quietly, and before they buried him, he said, no, not here, somewhere else. And that's how people knew that here is the inheritor of the Ramak, Rabbi Moshe Cordovero. And that's a fact. Rabbi Moshe Cordovero was the great Kabbalist before. He wrote an encyclopedia on the Kabbalah, on the Zohar. And the Ari came, and he changed things a little bit, okay? He didn't cancel out the Ramak, Khalila, but he added on new ideas, okay? The idea of Tzimtzum, okay? And so the Ari came, and he did things quietly. We have hardly things that are written about him in fact when he was here. Everything was written after. Although, and we'll get to this not today, but we have a eulogy, one hesped given at the halvaya, okay, the levaya of the Ari, 1572, by Rabbi Shmuel Ozida. And we'll talk about that. Okay? It's about 30 pages or so of a eulogy of somebody giving a hesped on the Ari without the stories that we read about him after. Okay? So it's interesting to see what the hesped about him is before all the other stories come out. Okay. But I want to get back to Rabbi Yosef Karo and the Ari. And I don't know how much time I have. How much time do I have? 10 minutes? Okay. Rabbi Yosef Karo, again, was 82 years old, and the Ari was about 36, 37. And they met. But we don't have descriptions how they sat and they learned together. No. It all depends what you read from. If you read, for instance, from the Magid Meshalim that was written by Rabbi Yosef Karo. If you remember, I mentioned the Magid Meshalim, the mystical diary of Rabbi Yosef Karo, who wrote and copied down the conversations he had with the Magid, with the angel mentor he continued to talk with in his house here behind the wall. In this book, Magid Meshalim, okay, the Magid tells Rabbi Yosef Karo when in Heishin Chavtet, that's 1569, on the day of the Brit, okay, the Brit of his son Yehuda. Remember, I told you that he married a young lady, Ashkenaziyah, and she bore him a son in 1569, 1570, that time, in Elul of Shin Chavtet, and there was the Brit of his son. Rabbi Yosef Karo is 82 years old, and he's at the Brit of his son. And the Magid tells him, V'ashevach l'Hashem asher lefli chasdo v'rachamav imcha. He's telling him, Lezakotcha latpis, I'm doing good things. You have good things coming up. You're printing soon your Kesef Mishneh book. You're printing soon your Avkat Rochel book. And you will be a big Kabbalist. You will delve into the wisdom of Kabbalah more than the Rosh. Resh, Aleph, Shin. So the Magid is telling Yosef Karo, the great halachist, he's 82 years old, you're going to be a big Kabbalist, even more than the Rosh. Who is the Rosh? Resh, Aleph, Shin. We don't know. Resh, it could be Rabbi Ashkenazi, Rav Ashkenazi, the Ari. In other words, he's telling him, Yosef Karo, you're going to be a bigger Kabbalist than the Ari. Or maybe Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, Rosh. Or maybe Rabbi El-Kabetz Shimon. Rabbi El-Kabetz, we don't know. It could be, it's written Rosh, Resh Aleph Shin. You're going to be a bigger Kabbalist than the one in Meron. And that one, he will learn from you Kabbalah. That's what the Magid is telling Rabbi Yosef Karo. Lachen chazak ve'amat v'chulei v'chulei. That's the Magid Meshalim. But in the Shivchei Ha'ari, written on the Ari, it says the opposite. In the Shivchei Ha'ari book, okay, the legends on the Ari written about 50 years after the Ari passed away, it describes here Rabbi Yosef Karo, he describes Rabbi Yosef Karo, the great Rabbi Yosef Karo, who has an angel mentor talking with him. But in the Shifchei Ari, it says, but Rabbi Yosef Karo will not be would not have more wisdom than the Ari. אף על פי כן לא חשיבי דמי לפני חוכמתו של הארי. He won't be bigger with wisdom than the Ari. This is in the Shifchei Ha'ari book, okay? And then it describes here that, how do we know? Because when Rabbi Yosef Karo wanted to learn with the Ari, Kabalah, the Ari said, no, it's not for you. You're Ramak. Rabbi Yosef Karo wanted to anyway. And when they started studying together, what happened? Rabbi Yosef Karo fell asleep. The same story with the Alshech, you know. It's the same story with the Alshech. But we'll talk about with the Alshech also. So here in Shifchei Ha'ari, we have a story of Rabbi Yosef Karo wanting to learn Kabbalah with the Ari, but falling asleep. Let me remind you that Yosef Karo was in his 80s then, and the Ari was only about 36, 37. So that's the second story. And we're going to finish up. That's from Shifchei Ha'ari. Okay? And the third story, short one, in Shifchei Ha'ari, is amazing. Because this story tells us something historical. It tells us that in 1607, I mentioned this last time, in 1607, Rabbi Shlomo Shlumil came from Europe and interviewed people here in Tzfat and wrote down the stories of the people in Tzfat, telling him about what they know about the Ari who passed away 35 years ago. Okay? And one of the people who was interviewed was the wife of Rabbi Yosef Karo, the young lady. She's an old lady by now, 1607, after her husband passed away in 1575. And she tells Rabbi Shlomo Shlomil the story that one day after she was his wife, okay, which means in the later days of Rabbi Yosef Karo, Rabbi Yosef Karo went to the celebration, to the Seudat Mitzvah of his son getting engaged to the daughter of the Ari. Not the little son that was just born, but Rabbi Yosef Karo had an older son, maybe Shlomo, who got engaged to the daughter of the Ari. The daughter of the Ari may have been 7, 8, 9, or 10, or 13 years old, not more, okay? She was only getting engaged. They didn't get married yet. And Rabbi Yosef Karo came back from the engagement party, and he started telling his wife, you can't believe what I just heard now. What I just heard from the Ari, Ken, is something no one anybody else in the world ever heard. But I'm afraid of him. I'm afraid that his time is coming soon. Okay? And that's what happened. The Ari passed away. So we have a story here of the engagement between the son of the Rabbi Shlomo, of Rabbi Yosef Karo, and one of the daughters of the Ari. Were they only engaged and didn't get married? So we'll keep that for the next time. Because were they in-laws? Okay? According to this story, at least they got engaged. So we'll keep you in suspense until next time about that story. So here a little bit about the relationship between these two great rabbis here in.
So it's interesting because you said that the Yosef Karo had about 200 students.
In his
But
yeshiva.
the Ari had only about 40, you're saying?
See, the Ari didn't have an established yeshiva here. He went to a certain place a little away, somewhere in the Jewish quarter, maybe a little outside of the Jewish quarter, the Beit HaYizger. He made a little Beit Midrash there. But for a while at least, he brought the families of his students to there also. And according to one of the stories, the wives used to fight each other, and didn't work out so well. Rabbi Yosef Karo had his yeshiva with 200, by the way, 200 students. That's an historical fact, I'm sure. Yeah. That's fine. I mean, 200, that's not, if he would have written 1,000 students, I would suspect. He wrote 200 students, that's fine. There were yeshivot here in Tzfat with 200 students. So that's fact, but that's in 1567, a little before, by the description of the Yemenite to Tzfat.
Yeah.
Okay.
Very good. Chazak u'baruch.